This is a video showing how to convert a gas car to electric with the intent of helping people free themselves from gasoline and the clutches it has on us. Free us so we can fly. In this video, the engine is already taken out of the car and we're starting with the clutch disc. We take the rivets off to disassemble it. Alright, this is our clutch disc, and the first thing we're going to do is disassemble it so that we can get this inner hub out. So once we've gotten the rivets out of this thing, there's where our rivets were, this whole thing just falls apart and we end up with this little guy right here, and that's our spline to go on our hub. Alright, so I machined out the Lovejoy coupler so that it's the same size as the hub. This way we will be pressing that clutch disc hub inside the Lovejoy coupler. This will give us our transmission side of the coupling. I heat up the coupler before I do the welding because otherwise it might pull it around. Same thing with that big bolt. That's to keep it from moving around while we're welding. Even though it was a tight fit going in, it still has the ability to move when you're doing the welding. So our finished product is ready to go onto the transmission. On the transmission there's a little throw-out collar which we're going to be trimming up a little bit to give us a little bit closer of a fit. Our Lovejoy coupler is a certain width, and that's going to be taken up by how close we can get this coupler to the transmission itself. We're still going to need some spacers between the motor and the transmission, so I cut off that end there and get just as much as I can of the transmission shaft. Next we put our coupler, our Lovejoy hub, on there, and I welded a little washer in there to keep that hub from sliding on too far. We don't want that hub to be sliding right up against the old collar. Alright, so there's our finished product, and now we're going to have to deal with how close we have the motor to the transmission. I put a straight edge across there to see how far the coupler is going to be sticking out of our plate. Here's our plate with our coupler sticking out so that we can get an idea of how big a spacer we're going to need. Our spacer is going to keep the motor and the coupler from squeezing the transmission. Alright, so that's how high up we need to be. I think it's about an inch as I remember, or 3/4 of an inch, so I use some 3/4 of an inch steel, square steel tubing to give me my spacing. Of course you want to grind all the burrs and everything off so you have a nice flat plate to work with, because if we got a little welding splatter or rust, it's going to push that up. I drilled all the holes so that they would fit on the transmission so I could bolt that down. Now I've got my motor. Now my motor is going to have the 3/4 inch square tubing bolted to this motor, our transmission plate. Our transmission plate and our square tubing all want to be sanded nice and clean to keep everything a nice tight fit. So here's our square tubing put on our motor, ready to put our other plate on top. I set the motor down so that, like a table, so that we can set the plate on top and then set the transmission on top of that. We're going to have to slide the transmission on top with the coupler so that everything will sandwich together and tighten the Lovejoy coupler from inside. Here I am sliding that motor shaft inside the Lovejoy coupler. There I've marked where the squares are going to be, and I'm going to cut some big holes so that the bolts that will attach this to the motor can still be gotten to once we get all this welded together. So we can bolt our plate right up to the motor through these holes, through those 4 bolts, and we're ready now to do the lining up magic. The lining up magic is where we set the motor right on top of the transmission and we spin the motor. As the motor's spinning, we'll move this plate around a little bit till we get the least vibration. Then we'll take it apart, clean up all the holes, and we'll be ready to bolt it all back. Now, that Lovejoy will line himself up. We just tap him around a little, and we see all of a sudden it gets very, very still. Next, we go ahead and weld our square tubing that's bolted to our motor to our flat transmission plate. After we get it tacked, we pull it out and do a good weld job on it, making sure that we got plenty of room for our bolts that hold this plate to the motor. Once we get this done, we're ready to put everything back together, and our crew arrives ready to bolt and put this transmission back in the car. We make sure that our Lovejoy coupler is not squeezing too hard, it's not pressing too hard, that our spacers are just enough, and we're ready to put the motor in the car.